Hey guys, it's Danny. Welcome to another episode from our Orchid Care for Beginners series. We have been renewed for another year, which means another year of video seminars that hopefully will help you better take care of your orchid. Let's kick off the new season with Mini Phalaenopsis. As many of you know, I went on a little bit of a spree lately. They're just so beautiful and affordable. I can't help it. And we're going to talk about them today, specifically how are they different than normal Phalaenopsis and what you should expect. I always get questions and comments about the subject when it comes to miniatures because they look a little bit different. So I'm going to address all of that today. There are some things which I believe you absolutely need to know and you should expect. So I'm going to go through all of that today while we look at some beautiful orchids. Today's episode, together with this entire Orchid Care for Beginners series, is sponsored by repotme.com, who offers you everything you could possibly need to properly take care of your orchid, whether it's a miniature or a big-sized orchid. From pots to potting mixes to fertilizers and accessories, they have it all. Now, if you're into other types of houseplants, they do actually have something for you as well. So I will link you down below to their website. Feel free to check it out at any time. And I will also link you to my personal favorite products, stuff that I tried, stuff that you can actually find videos on, and things that you still see me use to this day. So whenever you feel like it, you can pause the video, check them out down below. And with that said, don't forget to give this video a like if you end up enjoying it. And why not subscribe? I post orchid content and houseplants content very often, multiple times a week. So with that said, let's start with the beginning. The care that these orchids require. Okay, so this one is easy. Miniature Phalaenopsis take the exact same care as their standard cousins, the bigger sized Phalaenopsis. And this is because they are both very complex man-made hybrids, and they do share many common parents. The difference is that most, if not all, miniature Phalaenopsis in the flower shops have a particular species as their parent that is much smaller and produces much smaller flowers, and it's usually the dominant parent. This is, of course, the Equestris, for those of you who already know your orchid species. Other than that, as I was saying, they can actually share quite a lot of parents with the bigger Phalaenopsis. So when it comes to light, temperature, humidity conditions, and all of those things, you should offer these orchids the exact same things you're offering to your other Phalaenopsis. The only difference, and this has nothing to do with them, is that maybe miniature Phalaenopsis will require slightly more frequent watering because typically they will be potted in tinier pots that get jammed in decorative pots. So just keep an eye on how fast they dry because they might dry slightly faster than your other orchids due to the pot size. Other than that, there really is no difference, not even when it comes to blooming. The same triggers that initiate brand new flower spikes on the standard Phalaenopsis will initiate flower spikes on these guys as well. They can rebloom on the same flower spikes, they can produce secondary branches if you try to stimulate a secondary branch by cutting the flower spike under a node. If you want to learn more about that, links down below. And they can also produce brand new flower spikes from the base. Bottom line, if you have success with normal Phalaenopsis, you'll have success with these guys as well. And if you're absolutely new to orchids and you just received one of these guys, check the description. I will link you to my it's not very fast, it's one video of just basic Phalaenopsis care, and also to the 12 episodes that I dedicate to Phalaenopsis care, which expand on each subject. You'll have everything down below if you want to watch it. And before we move on, just another idea. No matter what name your mini Phalaenopsis has, whether it's espresso orchid, little girl, little princess, I've seen quite a few names, they're all the same. That is just a branding the company puts on that particular line of products. Many of these orchids are not even registered. They don't have an actual ID. I don't know how most of these are actually called or if they even have a name. So if you feel like calling your orchid Sandy or Bill, you can absolutely do so. They all take the very same care. The second thing you absolutely need to expect from your miniature Phalaenopsis is to have to repot it pretty soon in a much bigger pot. Now, one of the most common questions that I get is if a miniature Phalaenopsis will grow to be this size, and the answer is no. But it will grow a little bit larger Leaf-wise, we'll get to that, but root-wise, oh brother, it's gonna get gigantic. Now let me give you a close-up between the roots of this orchid, which is a much bigger Phalaenopsis, and this one. Do we see that the size, or actually the width or thickness of the roots, it's not very different? Yep, miniature Phalaenopsis actually have the same sized roots as most standard sized Phalaenopsis, which means 10 roots on a miniature Phalaenopsis will be just as large as 10 roots on a standard sized Phalaenopsis. And most of the times when we purchase these tiny orchids, we get them in these very, very tiny pots. These are very young plants. Nurseries sell them typically when they first bloom, and at this stage they're not fully mature just yet. They will mature fully in about another 2 years, and I'll show you some comparisons, don't worry. This also means that the nursery is using the tiniest pot possible, due to maybe economy, space saving, whatever reason. But in a short while in our care, this pot will not be enough. So what size of a pot should we use when we repot? I'll show you on a practical example. So this is a brand new orchid. I just purchased it a couple of weeks ago. This is an orchid that I purchased about 8 months ago, and I potted it in, I believe it's a 3-inch pot, an 8-centimeter pot. I'll put it on the screen just to make sure I'm not making mistakes. I'm not very good with inches. And already, can we see that there are roots pretty much everywhere in the pot? Yeah, that's how fast this orchid grew. And this orchid, which I assure you is a miniature Phalaenopsis, I had it for about 2 years already. And this is the pot that it resides in. This is actually a very typical pot size for the standard sized Phalaenopsis, which you purchase again at a younger age. This is a 12-centimeter pot, which I think would make it a 5-inch pot. So as you can see, my little mini Phalaenopsis grew into quite a medium-sized Phalaenopsis. Well, I would say that this is the biggest, let's say, the root system might get. It might get maybe slightly bigger. You might need a 1 or 2 centimeter pot upgrade, but I don't think it's gonna go more than that, because with time the older roots will die off as well. So if you're an absolute beginner, the first pot that I would use is this one. I would not jump directly to this one. And the reason for this is very simple. If you're a beginner, the first year of taking care of your orchid will be full of boo-boos, pretty much. These orchids are very forgiving, so don't worry, we all made a lot of mistakes, but in the first year you're gonna get adjusted to your orchid, how frequent you need to water it, what technique suits you better, how your environment changes throughout the year, and so on. So the first year, you're prone to making a lot of mistakes. A tinier pot doesn't actually retain all that much water, so if you water too frequent, it's not gonna take an eternity for that water to evaporate, so you're a little bit safer from root rot. Whereas if you pot it directly into something like this and you're not careful, you can absolutely suffocate the roots. Obviously, if you're a seasoned grower, you can go from this to this. This is what I do. I decided not to waste time with intermediate pots, because in 1 year you need to repot again. But if you don't really know how to care for your orchid, go with the intermediate size. Don't go with the big size. But just so you know, you have to expect that your miniature will actually grow at least as big as this. Definitely when you repot, and let's say you want to get rid of the sphagnum moss or whatever type of medium it comes in, if you want to put it back, you will discover that it simply will not fit again. Don't try to put it back. It's not gonna stay in. It's gonna start to dehydrate very, very fast. It's simply going to remove the medium or actually grow roots on the bottom. I have an example with these new orchids to show you. So you will only have left roots rather than potting medium. And the bad thing about that is that they will dry out pretty fast. You might actually dehydrate your orchid if you're not careful to water it in time. So do pot it up in a bigger size. Don't try to put it back in this. Save the pot. You're gonna use it with other very tiny orchids. But mini phals, they're too big for these pots. They're actually not that miniature now that I think about it. The next thing you need to expect is that overall their size will be slightly bigger, including the leaf span. but not as big as a standard Phalaenopsis. I think they will go to a more of a medium sized. And I have an example here. This is a very new orchid that I just purchased, and this is the 2-year-old. You can see the difference is there, but it's not incredibly large. So if you were wondering if your orchid will start to become a monster taking over your life, it's not gonna do that, but it will grow just a little bit larger. And in fact, you do want that. You want your orchid to reach its full potential. This will tell you that you're doing it right. You're giving it everything that it needs to thrive. With bigger leaves comes more blooms, because leaves are just like solar panels. They convert the energy of the sun into plant food, and they feed themselves and sustain flower spikes. So what you want to have are actually bigger and bigger leaves until they reach full size. What you don't want to have is smaller and smaller leaves. This means something is wrong with your orchid. Either it's getting dehydrated, either there's a problem with the roots, or you're not providing adequate fertilizer, or you have a pest issue. So in this example that I'm showing you, you can see I have a very tiny leaf here, which is also distorted. I actually had thrips on this orchid. And even though it currently has 3 flower spikes, pretty branchy as well, this is only because I have a lot of leaves on this orchid. And whatever affects the normal Phals will affect tiny Phals as well. So if you see tiny leaves on your mini Phal, it doesn't mean it's normal. Even if it's a miniature Phal, it needs to have bigger leaves, bigger and bigger leaves, certainly bigger than the ones it comes with. Another aspect I do get questions on is the flower size. Will the flowers get bigger as the orchid ages? And the answer is sadly no, or fortunately no, depends. I actually really like tiny little flowers. So yes, the orchid can actually grow a little bigger, but the flowers will not change. The flowers will be pretty much the same and identical throughout the orchid's life. What will change, and you can expect that, that's the best thing about these orchids, you can expect much better bloom shows. Now, nurseries can get these orchids up to a point, being that they're very young, they will never put on their full potential at their first blooming. And all of these orchids are sold at their first blooming, which means the next bloomings, with proper care, proper light and food and all of that, you can get much better bloom shows. You can get multiple flower spikes, branching flower spikes. Miniature Phalaenopsis can actually produce an abundance of tiny little flowers, again, depending a little bit on the hybrid, but definitely all of my miniature Phalaenopsis looked much better a year, 2 years, 3 years after I purchased them. Because 1, I grew them to their full maturity, and 2, I gave them what they needed, which is in the tutorial down below in the description. So yes, you can expect much better bloom shows. Not bigger flowers, but more flowers, a bigger number of flowers, more branches, more flower spikes even. Why not? You can expect your orchid to get better and better as it ages. Let's talk a little bit about a maintenance aspect. These orchids typically don't need a stake for their flower spike. They will typically have a naturally curvy type of flower spike. Now, most Phalaenopsis, all flower shop Phalaenopsis will have these curvy flower spikes. They will lean towards the light. The difference is the bigger Phalaenopsis have bigger blooms as well, and some of those blooms can be very heavy. And even though you can absolutely keep your orchid unstaked, sometimes with the bigger Phalaenopsis you can find your plant on the floor because the flowers were so big as they opened that the orchid herself became very top heavy and tumbled to the floor, which is not fun. It happened to me a lot. These guys, not really gonna happen. The flower spikes are pretty compact. You can see they're not very tall. They will not grow very tall at all, but they are strong. Again, if we compare the flower spikes of a mini Phalaenopsis to a standard sized one, you will see they're very similar. But as we saw, the flowers are very tiny. They weigh practically nothing. So you can have a big inflorescence and not actually tumble over the pot. The mini Phal, she's not light, she's heavy, trust me. With that amount of roots, I mean visually, do you think this plant is light? It's not, it's pretty heavy, and it's a miniature Phal. So because the plant is heavy, the flower spikes are sturdy and the flowers weigh nothing, you don't need to stake these plants. If you want to stake them to shape the flower spike as you want, you can definitely do so, but if you don't want to, don't. If you have your orchid in front of a window, you can expect the flower spike to not be as tall, to be a little bit more curved. But again, even in that case, I highly doubt it will tip over the plant unless you have it in a very tiny pot, maybe the pot it came with. Other than that, I don't see how flowers will ever tip over the pot on a miniature Phalaenopsis. And lastly, can we expect miniature Phalaenopsis to come in a wide array of colors and shapes and even fragrance? Yes, you can find yellow mini Phals, white mini Phals, white with a pattern, pinks, purples. You can find pyloric mini Phals, just like with the normal Phalaenopsis. And as I was saying, even fragrant ones, which I believe makes them ideal for offices, small homes, maybe apartments. If you have small windowsills, you can definitely fit one of these much better than a big monster of a Phalaenopsis. Those are really beautiful as well, but they are so big. Some of them take the space that 5 of these actually take. So for those of us who don't really have that much space, I do believe these are much better suited orchids to have because they're just as easy, take the very same care. You don't need to learn new tutorials and things of the sorts. You just have to adapt everything to their size, pretty much. But now you know also what to expect in the future. Don't expect them to be this tiny forever, because kids grow up, right? They grow up as well. So alrighty guys, that's about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed today's video and you enjoyed hanging out with me. Thank you Repod.me for sponsoring yet another episode and of course another year of this series. Check out down below the whole playlist of our Orchid Care for Beginners series. And yeah, stay tuned for the next episodes. And before I let you go, if you want to look me up on Instagram and Facebook, you can definitely do so. I am at MissOrchidGirl, of course, but the best thing to do is to subscribe to this channel. I post very regularly, and if you subscribe, you will be notified whenever I post a new video. Alright, so with that said, I'll see you all next time. Bye!